Hello, welcome back to Writer2Writer. My name is Jack Wallen. Thank you for coming back here to listen to me talk to other writers about their process. And today I have a very, very special guest because she and I have sort of worked together. She is a fellow actor and writer and an all-around amazing person. Her name is Meade Engard. I'm assuming I pronounced that right?
That's right.
Okay. So at the end of this, I'll give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about yourself because I like to start off right out of the gate. My question to you is the same question that I ask every writer on here. And that question is, what is your process, your writing process from the very beginning? How do you start to write and how does it evolve?
That's a great question. My writing process has changed a lot over the years. I started writing when I was extremely young. They had those contests every year at my school where you would write a short story and you'd get it entered and you might go to the finalists. I don't even remember what those were called, but I used to write all of my stories longhand on notebook paper. And I'd like do little errata in the margins. I still probably have some of those somewhere. And of course, all my early stuff was hyperderivative.
Well,
because
how old were you?
I mean, I was probably writing stories at 8. So
right.
Who knows? Stories about like unicorns and like I think one of them was like a story about a Viking girl.
Mm-hmm.
But that would have probably played well this year. I feel like Vikings are in.
Oh, sure. Sure.
But yeah, so occasionally I do like writing out longhand. When computers became such a big thing, of course, I did start doing some writing on computers. So as far as like the mechanical aspect of writing, I've done a lot of different things. Sometimes when I wake up from a dream and I'm kind of in that haze and I've had like an idea, I will lay in bed with a notebook and just be like, that works most of the time. Sometimes I go back and I'm like, what does banana boat mean?
Right. I always tell people that if a dream is powerful enough for you to remember it, especially as an artist, then that means something and you should pay attention to it.
I agree.
I've had at least 4 books that were inspired by dreams.
Yeah, I've had one. But one of the challenges then is that if something happened in your dream, you don't necessarily have to keep it, right? Like dream logic isn't necessarily the way fiction logic works. So
no, I agree. But at the same time, especially when you're like my most recent book, when I woke up from that dream, I was like, oh my God, the feeling that I got from that. I mean, it was such a joyous feeling.
And is this Defying Gravity?
Yeah. And I said,
which I'm a beta reader and I
right. But when I woke up from the dream, it's like, that has to be a story. That has to be something. And of course, as I wrote it, it evolved sort of away from the original dream. But at the same time, I knew that it was a crazy idea. And and I thought, how do I apply this to reality and make it believable? And then at the same time, you think, okay, well, audiences are used to suspending their disbelief for certain things, and you have to. I think unless you're writing, biographical or autobiographical fiction, you certainly can't add, magic realism into it. But at the same time, I think it's important, especially those dreams that grip you so tightly. You have to. I think you have to honor those somehow. You have to honor those as an artist.
I mean, magical realism, that's also one of my favorite genres. When you told me that Defying Gravity was that, I was like, yes, I write a lot in magical realism. And I think you don't have to be confined by the world's of reality for sure in fiction. I do think that the story has to have its own internal logic.
Yes.
Right? Whatever your rules are, you have to stick to.
Of course. You can't go around. I mean, you can't make a rule and then break it just because the original rule doesn't work. I mean, I've been in those situations. I don't know about you, but I've been in those situations where I've written something and all of a sudden it, in fact, it happened with Defying Gravity. All of a sudden, what I had written started to go against the original push of the book, and I had to step back and go, how do I keep this that I've written, that the universe told me to write? How do I keep that and then still hold true to the original idea of the book? And it took well, actually, it took a single song to help me realize what I had to do. So, our inspiration comes from everywhere.
Now you have to tell us the song, Jack. Them's the rules. I don't make them.
the song is by Sky Harbor, and oh my gosh, what is the title of it? It's the title of their latest album. I can see the album cover on it. Hold on.
I was gonna say you might have it right there.
I got to get my glasses on. It's called Sunshine Dust.
Oh,
Sunshine Dust. And I had this, as I was listening to this song, I was out for a run and I was listening to this song, and all of a sudden I imagined, as I was running, light just spilling from my body, just from every pore. And I was like, oh my God, that's where this thing has to go. So I stopped, pulled out my phone, sent myself an email. I can't remember what the email said. It said something like Sky Harbor Light. And when I got the email, I was like, oh yeah, okay, now I know how to go back to that original idea and stay true to it while at the same time letting it evolve.
That's a very powerful image, the idea of light emanating from your body. Yeah. I like that.
Especially and you'll get this, especially for those of us in the theater.
That's all we do is emanate light, dark, joy, fear.
Yeah. Plus there's the actual physical manifestation of light that we have to deal with.
You have to find your light.
You have to find your light, and you're looking out over the audience and you're pretty much blind because of the light, but you can't actually let them know that you can't see them. You just see this big blur of people.
I don't want to get too far afield from writing, but one of my favorite things is when you are breathing with the audience, right? It's like you're like in that collective breath.
Well, that's a wonderful image, but I don't think it's just limited to the theater. I'm sure that you've had these moments where you felt like you were breathing with your characters, or breathing with the
oh God.
And it's it's those moments where I feel like it's not just about a connection to the character, but it's a moment where you feel like you've truly given life to these people.
Yeah, no, that's really accurate. There have been times when I've been driving the car and I have to actually pull over because I'm watching a scene and I'm trying to drive.
Yes, right, of course.
Like if you're a visual writer, if you like visualize these characters and scenarios, it's like, and then you're like, I have to write this down. I don't have any paper. Right. Of course, now we have smartphones, so that's easier. But it used to be really, like I used to like scribble notes on like, fast food bags.
Right. There's a great story about Anne Rice, and one of her homes. There were notes scribbled everywhere on the walls, on the door jambs, on everything. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Can you imagine buying that house and then walking in and thinking,
be like, here's the Vampire Lestat.
I don't think I could paint over that. I think I would want to keep it. Of course, she probably painted over because she probably wouldn't want anybody to see her notes from her previous books.
Well, not all of our notes are pretty, for sure.
Oh God, I'm like, oh God, no.
That's why drafts exist.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll look back at my to be written file and look at the notes that I took for the books that I had written, and then I realize how much different the books that actually were written were from the original idea.
Ended up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will talk to myself either as my character or have conversations with other characters. And that is like madness, right? Like,
it really is.
And I think it's probably common to actor writers specifically because
I think so.
We have to physically do it.
Well, yeah, and I think that physically embodying a character, I mean, that's kind of our trade as actors. And as writers, there are times when, especially if you're having trouble connecting to a character, I'll just improvise a monologue of that character.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I know what that character is truly about. And
I have been working on, though it's been a little while since this one. I have been working on a play about Anne of Cleves. People pronounce it a different way. The wife of Henry VIII that actually survived him. There were two of them that survived. Right. But I started like just talking in her voice, and I must have taken like 18 minutes worth of dialogue.
Nice.
Right, just talking in her voice. Yeah. And then I was able to incorporate that into the dialogue of the show. And some of it was garbage, of course, but a lot of it stayed.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I think one of the things when I have new authors or new writers that come to me for advice, one of the things I always say is the best thing you can do to really hone your writing chops is to write the shortest thing you can and start with a monologue. Monologues are the hardest things to write because they're encapsulated and you only have a certain amount of time to get across your point. So you can, and actually starting with a monologue is much more challenging, but you could say, start with a 10-minute play or a short scene, whatever you can, and decide what that scene is going to be about, right? Like you remember the old A-B scenes that we used to do in acting class. You just write something that's very vague and start really getting a hold of how to write dialogue, because for most writers, dialogue is the hardest thing to write believably.
I think for actors it's very easy because that's
well,
all
of course it is, because we've studied, and how many of us have studied improv? And that's the other thing. That's the other piece of advice I give young writers. Like as soon as you can, find an improv class to take, because it's one thing. It's one thing to be able to write narration, but to write believable dialogue is a big challenge for authors. And sitting in on writing classes and such, and you hear some of the things that these instructors, I should say some instructors, because some of them are and some of them aren't. Some of these instructors, the advice they give you on writing dialogue, you're like, oh, how is that going to help someone write dialogue? It's like, you've got to actually learn how to speak off the cuff. And on top of which, you need to be able to do that with someone else. So, it's like, just sit down and have a Meisner exercise or something. Well, maybe not Meisner. Those repetition exercises aren't going to help you write dialogue, but
I have a story of a writing class in college where I got an A- because the professor said that my dialogue was not believable. And I had to tell him that I had taken the dialogue almost word for word from an actual fight that I had had with a boyfriend.
Oh.
And so the idea of believability is very interesting to me, because he wrote in the margins, real people don't talk like this. And I was like, does that mean that I'm pretentious? Is that...
right.
I mean, maybe. But I did always find that interesting. And I think as I got more sophisticated as a writer, I learned to fine tune it a little. Like, I still kind of write slightly heightened dialogue. I like interesting words and I use them. Right. That might have been it. I think maybe I used too many big words. And he was like,
I was guilty of that a long time ago. And I think there's a part of it, though, however, I think that there's a bit of truth to that, because we are writers and words are our tools. And to limit yourself to the vocabulary of the average reader, or not the average reader, the average person, I think is to do yourself a disservice. Because who wants to read a book filled with monosyllabic words?
I mean, the thing about having big vocabularies is it allows you to use such shades of words.
Yeah, exactly.
You can use exactly the right word.
Right.
to communicate what you're feeling. The
Mm.
problem is if your reader doesn't know that word and they can't pick it up from the context,
Exactly.
you're actually obfuscating things.
Right. Of course, the
So
nice thing about the Kindle is they can tap that word and learn what the word is.
that's true.
And
That is true.
I have always been of the mindset that I would rather help educate, because I think that art has three purposes: to educate, to enlighten, and edify. And I think that oh no, I'm sorry, educate,
Entertain.
educate, entertain, and what was that other one? Oh my gosh, it's morning. Sorry.
Enlighten.
Enlighten, educate, entertain, and enlighten. And I think that if we always assume that our writer has a certain intelligence and that intelligence is average or lower than average, then we're going to fail part of our mission. And I know that you can't just, there can't be a deluge of overly long words and complicated sentence structures in your book, because you'll lose people. But every once in a while, I think it's nice, because especially with like dialogue tags and things like that, if you just use the same words over and over again, it gets repetitious and boring. So, you know,
How many times can you use she stammered before
I
people are
know,
like,
I know, I know. Make it interesting. And I love when I'm reading a book and I have to go, oh, what's that word?
what is that word?
Because
Yeah.
I have just expanded my vocabulary.
Well, we love words.
Of course. That's
So
true.
it's, I remember when I was like in 4th grade, I was making lists on loose leaf of my favorite words.
Yeah.
Like loquacious
Yeah.
and wispy and
Somnambulant.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, so if you love the music of words, and I do think it's interesting when you have performers and writers in the same person,
Yeah.
because we do hear the music,
Right.
right?
Right. And the other thing is, and that's a great point, is especially as actors, when we're writing, we're not just seeing the words, we're hearing them and we're feeling them, and we're hearing the rhythm of the sentence structure. So, and I know that I was very guilty of this early on as a writer, is that I overused the ellipse, because as I was writing these sentences, I was writing them as an actor going, this is how I would say this line. And I would pause here. How do I make a pause?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I have an MFA in acting. I don't have a degree in writing or English or anything. So my early stages of being a writer were simply an extension of my being an actor. So
Right.
I had those were the tools that I had to use. Now I know better, sort of.
Well,
My editor might
as
disagree with
as
me, but
as an editor, I have to tell you that's super common, the
yes.
ellipsis misuse. And in
Yeah.
fact, one of my favorite writers that I always edit for, I got to the point where I just stopped correcting them and I put in the margins. I was like, I need you to find an replacement
Right.
because they were so overused.
Yeah.
And technically, they're not really used the way people use them, right?
Right.
You're supposed to use them when there are words missing, not when you're trying to
Right.
pause.
Yeah. Yes, I learned that too.
It's like dot, dot, dot.
Right. And and that's complicated for those of us who come from a performance
Yes.
background, because it's so ingrained in us to see words and to hear them in our heads and know that, it's like reading Shakespeare versus performing or seeing Shakespeare perform. Shakespeare was meant to be performed. It's so much easier to understand when you see it performed or where you hear it performed. When you just read it, you're missing out on the rhythm and the structure and the tonality of what he wrote. And when you see it performed, you get all of that. And so as an actor approaching, not dialogue's different,
Right.
but everything else in a book, you can approach it as a performer, but you still have to you have to follow through as a writer. And so you have to
Different
figure,
discipline.
yeah, you have to figure out how to put those words on the paper that sound the way you want them to sound, while at the same time read the way they should be read.
And there's almost like a resonance, right,
Yeah.
to a good piece of writing, whether it's dialogue or not. And you read it out loud. That's what I do a lot when I'm stuck or I feel like the words aren't flowing right. I read it out loud, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's my voice again. Okay.
Right.
I got it.
Right. I always tell people, and I've said this so many times, that I don't believe that there's a such thing as writer's block. I think that
Yeah.
writer's block is when a writer is not writing in their voice. They're either writing, they're either trying to force a voice, or they're trying to write in someone else's voice. And when you're doing that, you're going against your nature. And it's, you know, I honestly, I don't know of an author that is short on ideas. In fact, every author I know has too many ideas.
It's the boneyard.
Yeah. And so it's like, so I think writer's block has nothing to do with having a good idea.
Oh, I agree. And I always call it rotating the crops, right?
Yeah.
Because people who are talented with multiple arts, singing, dancing, acting, writing, creating, like crafting, visual arts, sometimes you have to switch, right? It's not necessarily that you are not a writer just because you're not writing.
Right.
It means that you have to let a field lie fallow for a bit. I haven't written on my creative writing projects for quite a while because I had a baby. And then there was a quarantine.
Right.
And I think when things are super stressful, I'm sure a lot of people watching this can appreciate, like, they're stuck, right? There's a wall there. And I think taking that pressure off, right?
Yeah.
They're just not, you're a writer, okay? Relax.
Right, exactly. Right.
No, you don't have, I think at the beginning of all this, there was that whole thing. It's like Shakespeare wrote this play during, this plague. And I'm like, okay, cool. A, we're not Shakespeare. And B, what about the unmentioned labor, which was his wife cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children,
exactly.
right? Like to free him up to write.
Right.
So I'm like, so unless you have a staff, like taking care of things for you, it's okay if you can't do laundry and write in the same day.
Exactly. Yeah, I guess I've been really lucky so far, because even during times of stress, I use writing as an escape, just like people use reading as an escape. And so it's there's only been a few times in the last 20 years when I haven't been writing. And one of those was when my father died. And the other time was when I was doing shows, because when I'm doing shows, I only have a certain amount of emotional and creative energy. And I don't want to short sheet one of those. So, especially like when we did Irma Vep.
Oh, God.
And
that show is such a marathon.
I know. And it's two people, a full-length show, and it took me 3 months to memorize everything. And now I've got to memorize it again. I know. So during that show, it was like, I can't do anything. Same thing with Cabaret. And that wasn't about memorization or anything. That was just, there was such an emotional commitment to that show that I didn't have it in me to go, I'm going to go right now. Because I was like, I was coming home from rehearsal just going, I can't do anything. I'm done.
I mean, that's such an emotionally devastating show anyway.
Yeah,
I can't imagine coming home and writing anything.
No. And I think that we artists tend to not police themselves with their expenditure of their artistic energy. And it's like, I know I have watched artists who were performing in a show, directing a show, trying to run a business, and then trying to write all at the same time, it's like you're gonna burn
Right.
out,
Yeah.
and then you're gonna feel resentment towards one of those endeavors.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, I mean, burnout is a real thing. And
Yeah.
I think artists, and I use artists to encompass like everything, right?
Yeah.
Artists are generous for the most part.
Yeah.
You want to do every project, you want to give it your all,
Yeah.
but you really only have so much. So you need
Right.
to be sensible
Yeah.
about what you sign on
Right.
to.
Yeah. One of the best lessons I learned in grad school was how to say no.
No, my favorite word.
Yeah.
Now that I'm an old lady, I'm like, nope, can't
Yeah.
do that. Sorry.
I still struggle with it.
Oh, sure.
It's
We're
like,
people pleasers.
we
You're
are.
you don't become an actor without wanting to please or entertain or amuse
Right,
people.
right. Of course, right now it's, given the situation, there's no theater going on, so I don't have to worry about saying no right now.
If somebody had come to me and said 2020 is the year that theater stopped,
I know.
I would have been like, what do you mean? Because theater
Right.
hasn't stopped since the ancient Greeks and
I know,
before,
I
when
know.
we were sitting around fires.
Right.
So
Yeah. I guess the difference is back then it wasn't beholden to shareholders and
well,
bottom
that's
line.
a different story,
And,
right?
yeah, and it's not a pandemic that would bring theater to a close. It's the lack of income that would enable them to keep the lights on, and it's a tragedy. And I'm afraid that there are going to be a lot of theaters that are going to face this
Me too.
closure. And I think, I've been getting a lot of people asking me, when are the theaters going to reopen? And I said, my answer is, if they're smart, they will hold off. They'll wait until 2021, and they'll reach out to and try to find benefactors to keep them alive, so they can hit 2021, hit the ground running and bring out their best season they can, to remind people why we need it. We need the arts.
Oh my God.
Imagine. I mean, and I've said this before. Imagine what this pandemic and this quarantine would have been like without the arts, without television, without music, without books.
I watch the free Met stream almost every night. I love opera, and and so I donate to them because I value them and I want them to continue. And I think if I could ask people watching this to do anything, it's pick your favorite arts organization and give. I promise they're struggling.
Oh yeah.
Even the really big successful ones have so much overhead. Like, they're not bringing money in, they're sending money out.
I saw a video from American Players Theater, who was the theater that actually gave me my start as a professional actor right out of grad school. And it was their artistic director, and she was weeping in this video because she had to announce that they were closing. They weren't going to have a 2020 season.
Oh my God.
And I mean, it broke my heart. And soon after that, they started getting all of these donations, and they're able to remain afloat, which would have been a tragedy to lose them, because they're one of the finest outdoor Shakespeare companies in the country. And I think that if people need to step back and go, what would this country be like without the arts? And hopefully, my fingers are crossed that this pandemic and quarantine have helped them to realize how important the arts are, whether it be music, theater, movies, books, anything. And you've got to support those artists. Support whether it's someone an author you read or not. If you see somebody that's got it, I mean, let's face it, especially with indie authors, books are cheap. And
the market is crowded.
It's but if you can drop 99 cents on a book, whether
even
you read
$5, come on, you spend $5 for that latte, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know how many hours that represents?
I know. And I would say to people, if you can, and I know this is going to sound a little bit crazy, But if you can dedicate, say, $5 a week or $10 a week, whatever you can, and just go out to Amazon and find a new author that you've never read before and give them a chance. And then even if you're not going to read it, just buy it. Just buy this 99-cent book. And it means the world to the people that spent the time and energy to create it. And it shows that you are supporting them. Because like you said, they won't hesitate to drop $3 on a coffee. You know, you can buy books for less than you can buy a candy bar or a Coke.
The arts, especially books, unfortunately, because of the digital revolution, have become so undervalued and devalued. Right? So you go to the bookstore and the book is like $25 and you're like, oh, this is reasonable, right?
Right.
And you go online to Amazon and an equally new author, because it's not in physical form, you're like, $3.
Right.
What?
Right. But then you have, to them, I would say, how much joy are you going to get out of that? And you have to balance that. Am I going to gain and get an experience from this book that I would pay 99 cents or $3 from, and is it worth it? Of course it's worth it. Even if it's worth it for just a week's worth, a week's of distraction.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, but it's become so important that people understand that what we're dealing with is, years ago, Apple did everyone a disservice and said, we're going to let you buy a song for 99 cents. And then all of a sudden it became, here's an app for your phone for 99 cents. And then it was, oh, this app is for free. And then all of a sudden people said, I don't want to pay 99 cents for an app. I can get these other apps for free. Why would I buy it? Because someone spent the time to make it. Right.
Do you value it?
Yeah.
Then you should buy it.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, and you know, it's like, even within the because I know a lot about this, even within the software community, there are projects out there that are really important, and and I'm talking massively important, like they help run enterprise businesses, and they struggle for money. It's like, if you use something on a regular basis and you got that something for free, then you should somehow figure out a way to help support the person that created it. And this was one of the things that I always I don't complain about, but I have a problem with, is so many authors, especially indie authors, well, mostly indie authors, offer like the first book in all of their series free. They call it perma-free. It's like, why would you do that? You're setting a bad precedent. You are telling these people that you can get this book for free, and they're doing it so on the hopes that they will then turn around and buy the rest of the series.
But that's not how that works.
They'll just get your free book and read it and move on to the next free book.
The people who value books will buy your book.
Exactly.
The people who want free stuff won't buy your book.
Right, exactly. You know, and I think it's just as important for authors to value their work as it is for authors to hope that readers value their work.
Well, and books are a necessity, I believe. I love that Erasmus quote. He's like, if I get a little money, I buy books, and if there's any left, I buy food and clothes.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, especially in times like these, we need distraction. We need to be taken out of ourselves, and books are one of the many ways.
Yeah. And I get it. I know that books aren't quite as chic right now as is binge watching television, and it's cyclical. One day the popularity of books will come back.
Yeah. I mean, the books at least don't ask you if you're still reading, right? Every time Netflix is like, are you still watching this? I'm like, listen, I don't need your judgment, Netflix. Yes.
Right. And as soon as you open up a book, it's not going to blast an ad at you.
Oh, Lord.
You know, books are good. They're good for you. They're good for your mind. They're good for your soul. They're good for your heart. And, you know, and we put a lot of time into them. And it's, you know, I'm not on my knees begging. You're either going to buy my books or you're not going to buy my books.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not that author that's going to spam the world to buy my book, because I have more respect for myself and I have more respect for people.
It's not just the money though, right? Yes,
Right.
money's nice. We all
Right.
need it.
Yeah.
It's being able to share
Yeah.
what you worked so hard to
Right.
create.
Right.
It'd be like an actor who has nobody in the audience.
Right. And
So
I
like,
have been there. I have performed a show for one person before.
but that one person really enjoyed it.
They did. They did. That was my first show in New York, and it was
How
devastating.
demoralizing.
It really was. Now the second show was, sold out every night, but the first show was like, are we really going to perform this? There's only one person out there. And the director's like, think of it as a rehearsal.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, okay. I'm okay with that. But you can't do that. I mean, with books don't have rehearsal. Well, I guess we do have rehearsals. We have beta readers and editors and stuff. But at the same time, when you create a book and you see it floundering and no one reading it, it's like a tiny piece of your soul dies.
It does. And there's a lot of noise out there, unfortunately. There are a lot of people hitting publish that should never hit publish.
Right,
not
right.
just because of talent levels, but
Right.
because they're not edited, right? They're not ready.
Yeah.
It's so
Yes,
easy.
I spent a long time recording audiobooks as well. And some of the audiobooks that I've recorded, the whole time I'm recording them, I'm thinking, this was not ready for publishing. It was not even close to being ready. And it's not just the grammar or the spelling. It's this story.
Structural.
Yeah. You needed beta readers. You needed editors. But I can't say that. I'm just editor. So
no, you're just there to be a voice.
Yeah.
And
that's really hard, because when you're trying to record a book, an audio book, and the text it's hard to make sense out of. You have to figure out a way to record it as an audio, in the audio form, in such a way that when the listeners hear it, they know what's going on. And I've had books where I'm like, I don't know how to say this. This sentence makes no sense whatsoever, and I don't know how to do this. So eventually it's just like, I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it, and it's just going to be kind of an aside, and hopefully
it makes sense.
Yeah. And
the reason I became a developmental editor is because I saw so many writers who didn't know how to structure a story, right? Like they could write, but they couldn't tell a story.
Right. So we probably should be ending about now, because we might get cut off. So I want to give you a chance to tell people how they can reach out to you, and kind of what the services you offer or the books you have to purchase. So take a moment, get on the stage.
I will. So I can be reached at Blue Gables Publishing and Consulting. It's Blue Gables, blue-gables.com is our business website. I am an editor, primarily developmental. I also do proofreading. I'm a playwright. I've had 4 different plays performed. I'm a fiction author. I've had anthologies published. But I'm not selling books today. I mean, you can find me out there for sure if you look. Meade is my name that I write under. Though interestingly, there is an Meade out there writing a guide to pot. That's not me, just so you know. It's like a sister's guide to pot. Anyway, if that's your thing, cool, but that's not me. Yes. I ran a small press for 4 years, so my inbox is always open. I'm on Facebook as Anna Meade Engard, and I love to hear from people. I'm always giving out advice and like chatting with people, because I love working with artists. So.
Yeah, there's nothing better than working with an artist.
Right.
Especially with.
And come see my shows when I'm back on stage.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Dear God, whatever. The last thing I did before this pandemic started was go to an audition, and like the amount of deflating. Yeah. And I feel so much for people who were in production.
I know.
I had to cut the runs short.
Yeah. Or I just saw a post this morning saying today would have been or last night would have been the opening of this show, and I'm like, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, think of the artists out there and give your artist friends a hug. We're not necessarily okay.
We're not. No, we are. emotionally and mentally we're struggling. And I think that that's one of the things I'm so grateful that I discovered writing, because I have to, like every artist, I have to create. And if I'm not creating on stage, I'm creating with words. And if I cannot imagine the state that I would be in at this point in my life had I not started writing, I probably would have lost my mind.
I think that is some of what's happening. So,
I think so.
well, we all got to hang in there together.
Yes. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Always.
Just chatting with you. I miss you.
I miss you too.
And
I took some acting lessons with Jack, and he's amazing. So if anybody, I don't know if you still offer that, you could probably do it via Zoom.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. It's hard because so much of how I work is being able to really be there.
Yeah,
and
I know.
And feel the back and forth, the energy, and you just don't get that from Zoom. And but I've been thinking about it. I've been trying to figure out if it's if it's something that's viable for me with the way I work. But and it's also, I know what it's like to stand in front of a camera and perform, and especially
it's a different deal, right?
It is, especially when you're performing with your mindset on theater and you're standing there in front of a camera. You tend to, there's a disconnect, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I guess I better tone it down.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, if I had to perform with a big headset on, I'd be like,
yeah, or just with just recording yourself. There's this natural tendency for actors to go, oh my gosh, there's a camera in front of me. I'm performing for television or film, so I've got to make it more realistic and more natural. It's like, no, you need to do what you would do if you were performing on stage for me, because otherwise I don't know what your intent is. I don't know where you're going with this. I've got to know those things so I can help you.
One quick last thing, I just remembered. I'm directing a staged reading of Midsummer Night's Dream on Zoom.
Wonderful.
And that'll be online after next Friday.
And how
so if anybody's curious about that, you can go to my Facebook. I'll talk about it there. But yeah, it's actors from all over the country performing Midsummer on Zoom, because what else are you going to do?
Right, exactly. That sounds like a great project. Make sure you tune into that, people. Look for her on Facebook, and reach out to her if you are looking for an editor or just need a virtual hug from another artist. Yes. Anyway,
it's great to see you, Jack.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Mwah. Bye.
Mwah. Bye-bye.